everybody. My name is Jen Collins, and on behalf of the MTSS statewide team, we want to welcome you to this very special kickoff session, which was designed as a function of PD within our middle high school partnership series with behavioral health specialists. So if you're not in our series, but you've joined today to benefit from the content, we want to welcome you as well. We are here with Dr. Kathleen Lane and just are delighted to be able to spend some time with her over the next 3 hours, again, to benefit as behavioral health folks and wrap around some of the content that she's going to be offering us. Just a few housekeeping items. We will take a break about midway through. We should be finishing up with Kathleen's content around 4 o'clock, and then I'll give us some time to share an exit code with you and a survey and a few other announcements. We also want to just point out who your go-tos are if you are in the series regionally for continued training and technical assistance, and in particular, the scheduling of fall site visits. If you're in the series, one of our goals is to help you as job-alike groups work as a system, and then at the end of the year, kind of take note of what your ELA colleagues have accomplished, what your math colleagues have accomplished, what you've accomplished as behavioral health folks, and what your ESL colleagues have accomplished. And that will be under the supportive accountability of your team leaders, and they're in fact getting their first session with us through Mark Shin next week. So we really are moving full force into this series, and the goal is to give you domain-specific training so that we're able to come together and strengthen the systems that we're in. Your leads for this series in the central region and overall are Dr. Erica Karudar and Dr. Drew Hunter. Also in the east, we have Dr. Gina Spicknall-Cook, and in the west, we have Silky Caparelli. So those are folks who will be in contact with you throughout the year to touch base, to schedule site visits, and to accommodate any other professional development needs you might have. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Drew to introduce Dr. Lane and enjoy today. Thank you so much. Thanks, Drew.
Thank you, Jen. Welcome everyone and good afternoon. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kathleen Lane. Dr. Lane is a Roy A. Roberts Distinguished Professor in the Department of Special Education at the University of Kansas and Associate Vice Chancellor for Research. Dr. Lane's research interests focus on designing, implementing, and evaluating comprehensive integrated 3-tiered models of prevention to prevent the development of learning and behavior challenges and to respond to existing instances, with an emphasis on systematic screening. She is currently president of the Council for Exceptional Children Division for Research. She is also the co-editor of Remedial and Special Education and the Journal of Positive Behavior Interventions. Dr. Lane has co-authored 11 books and published over 200 refereed journal articles and 40 book chapters. So we're very excited and welcome Dr. Lane, and I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And what a nice introduction. All that means I have very few social skills. So I am truly grateful for the time with you today. I'm very informal. My name is Kathleen, and I'm looking forward to the next 3 hours with you. And to the extent that you feel comfortable, I'd love for you to turn on your cameras so that we can enjoy each other's faces today. And if you would go ahead and open up your chat, and I'm just going to do a little bit of orienting for the topic today. And I just want to, again, thank you for the gift of your time. I think especially right now when life is so full and a lot of things shifting on a daily basis, I think one of the greatest gifts we can give each other is time. So I know we've all got a lot of competing priorities. So to the extent that you can, take a deep breath and be present, and let's enjoy this learning today. And then we'll set some action plans at the end for hopefully future connections and opportunities to apply some of the content. So the topic for today, as I was invited, is to share a little bit about comprehensive, integrated 3-tiered models of prevention, as you heard Drew talk about. And just to kind of set the stage for today, you can think about Ci3T as a broadening of MTSS, and it's broadened in 2 pretty important ways. One, is that it has an explicit commitment to social and emotional well-being at Tier 1. And we'll go through some of the details. And I think I'm pretty much preaching to the choir with the group here today about the importance of making sure, especially at this time in history, that we're really addressing that as a Tier 1 support for students to make sure that every single child gets access to validated resources so that we can help people to become, people that are comfortable with each other, great decision makers, people that can self-regulate, and so that they can truly enjoy relationships with their peers as well as authority figures, not just in school, but in life. And then the second big feature of Ci3T is this whole idea of data-informed professional learning, so that you and your roles and other people that are providing professional learning resources and supports, they can know how to move the needle, not just for students, but for the adults that are supporting these students. So today, I'm hoping that you'll find some usefulness in this content. There are times for us to work in some breakout rooms to give you a little bit of time to process the information that's going to be shared. So as you get started and get settled, I'm hoping you will do the same of opening up your chat, renaming your name so that we can see where your LEA is and your first and your last name. And everything that I'm going to be sharing with you today is free access, and it's available on this website that is also in the chat. It's called ci3t.org. The presentation that I am sharing today is, you can download it if you'd like. It's on the presentation tabs, and it is an editable document. So if there's pieces that you want to pull out and use in your work, you're welcome to. And I'm going to be showing you some other resources that are also here, and I'll make those connections for you. So if you see things along the way that would be useful in your work as school psychologists and social workers and counselors and administrators, by all means, please feel free to help yourself. And then I'll also share some opportunities that you're welcome to drop in. We host monthly Ci3T trainer and coaches calls, which is just an opportunity to come in, meet other implementers, and get questions asked and answered. So thank you for the gracious welcome, and I'm excited to get started. One thing I wanted to also alert you to before we get moving on, the big plans for today is that when the pandemic hit in March of 2020, it was like for many of us flipping a switch and everybody went home, or to varying extents. And then we got a lot of questions about how are we going to do this? How are we going to provide education in person, remote, and hybrid situations? So we added a new tab to our website called Responding to COVID-19. And on this, there's a number of resources that are available for teachers and for families to help them negotiate this time. Because as we are embracing this idea of, I think about like structured flexibility, we're all committed to systems level work. And the nice part about those commitments is that we can adjust those systems to meet kids' multiple needs, whether in person, remote, or in hybrid instruction. So feel free to keep this as a place where you can refer back to today. And I am thankful to watch all the people that are getting logged in and getting settled and getting oriented. So if I were you today and going to take an opportunity to be present and enjoy this time together, my suggestion would be to go ahead and open just a blank Word document open on your computer to take down a couple of thoughts. We're going to do some conversations together, and we're going to walk away with some action plans. Or if you're a paper pencil writer like me, I am just got some notes down for myself, and I want to listen and learn about how I can best support you as you go forward. So today we're going to start by talking specifically about a comprehensive integrated 3-tiered models of prevention. I'm going to focus this conversation today on middle and high school, but this model has been tested from preschool to high school. And there's a lot of additional evidence at the elementary level. But as a former middle school teacher, I'm really excited to be here because I share some passion with you in this area. So as we get started, I want to really just first take a moment to thank you. I think that it is a complex and wonderful thing to get to work in school systems. And even pre-pandemic, if we were to take a picture of the United States of America, of all the kids that are out there right now that we're supporting from, school age kids from kindergarten to high school, you would find in that picture that there's about 12% of all school age youth have some type of challenge with either internalizing issues, shy, anxious, or withdrawn, or acting out like non-compliant, aggressive, that type of thing. And this was even pre-pandemic, that 20% of kids had mild to severe issues, and about 12% of kids had moderate to severe issues in this. And A long time ago, people used to think that, kids with behavior problems should go on and just get supports through special education services. And that is not the case. We know that less than 1% of all school-age kids go on to receive support for their behavior, in quotes, in special education. So the job that we are doing together today, and together across systems across Pennsylvania and across the United States, is going to really be helping to build efficient, effective tiered systems that are integrated to meet kids' multiple needs, because it is going to be the general education teachers that you interface with that are going to have day-to-day responsibilities of meeting these kids' multiple needs. And this is a tall order, because many, many teacher certification programs, and I'm speaking as somebody who was a former general education and special education teacher, but many general education programs have at most one class in classroom management, and at most one class in individual differences. So you get a day on learning disabilities, a day on emotional disturbance, and it's a complicated task. So in this age where I think we really need to be mindful of the complexities of what we're managing in school systems, I want to applaud you for the work that you're doing, thinking about tiered systems and being really intentional about supporting students and educators who are here. So when we think about Ci3T, this model was intended to simplify things in school structures. And for some of you who have been around, you might remember the days when the triangles used to be right triangles. So there was like one right triangle that would face this way, and it was like positive behavior support. And then there was another right triangle facing this way that was response to intervention. Raise your hand if you remember those triangles, right? And so then all of a sudden, these triangles started showing up on the same page, but it was like a middle school dance where there's a little bit of space in between these two triangles. Nobody was touching, but they were starting to get the idea that we had to think about academics and behavior together. And then things started touching. And by that, I mean, we started to introduce this idea of multi-tiered systems of support. And it was reading, and it was math, and it was behavior. And I don't think this was intended, but somewhere along the lines, people thought they could choose, like, I'm going to start with reading this year, or I'm going to start with math this year. And if I have time to, I get to behavior. But if you think about that from a school perspective, that means you're redesigning a system every single year for 3 years. And nowhere in there do you find social and emotional well-being in the base. So in 1996, we started to conceptualize, and by we, I mean the thousands of teachers that we've gotten to work with across the country and dear friends and colleagues and former students, we started to conceptualize in the late 90s what it could be like if we built one integrated system. Because right now in many buildings, there's like a really well-intended team that's looking just at academic data, and another one that's looking at behavior data, and another one that's looking at mental health considerations. And in a Ci3T model, we want to have one coordinated system that offers clarity on what the tier 1 offerings are for every single student, whether it's elementary, middle, or high school, and creating clarities as to what is offered in terms of academic instruction. And at the very core of this is positive behavior interventions and supports. Same standards as a national center for PBIS, which is pbis.org. And if you haven't been to that website recently, I encourage you to go check it out. They've done a really nice revamping and wonderful resources, some of which we're going to mention today. The one distinction in a Ci3T model is that rather than having it be a small group of people that set expectations for the PBIS element, we actually have a survey on our website. It's on the measures tab, and it's called School-Wide Survey for School-Wide Expectation Survey for Specific Settings, tons of S's. But it's actually a survey that you can send out to every single person in a school to find out, what do you think kids need to know to be successful in classrooms, in hallways, in non-instructional areas like arrival and dismissal. And this is important because we want to make sure that we are teaching kids the behaviors that will be likely to be reinforced by adults so that they can receive naturally reoccurring reinforcement along with behavior-specific praise. Also in this model is a commitment at tier 1 to bringing in validated resources to teach every single student skills like self-determined behaviors, like self-management, self-regulation, etc. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about what this integrated system is going to be like and the benefit that it holds for efficiencies and effectiveness. And this, when you think about these resources, This is all right now. Everything I'm sharing with you is on ci3t.org. And I'm going to connect you to some other websites as well, like PBIS.org. And no matter how solid your tier 1 is in any single school or any single system, we should expect that some kids are going to need more than tier 1 has to offer. And in this system, we'll talk about how those supports are integrated. So as you're thinking about this system today, I want you to know that it wasn't developed by one differently locale. This work started in Southern California, and I've had the honor to be on faculty at a number of different places. I started off at University of Arizona. I was on faculty at Cal State Los Angeles. I was at Vanderbilt for 10 years, UNC Chapel Hill, and now I'm starting my 10th year at University of Kansas. I do want you to know I am capable of keeping a job. I've had wonderful opportunities along the way. And one of the greatest gifts of having been at so many different universities is that I've been able to learn from educators like yourself in all these different states. And some of the work that I'm going to share today with you about systematic screening specifically grew out of the state of Pennsylvania. And thanks to great partners like Catherine and Jim and Tina Lawson, we've been able to learn together a lot about what works for whom and under what conditions. So along through these years has been a series of respectful partnerships. And so today, I just want to think about what it could look like if this was installed really intentionally in the systems that you support. So as part of a tier 1 experience, you would have a Ci3T implementation manual. And in it, it would have clarities as to what's expected in terms of that academic domain. So students, it would be laid out for them what their expectations are. Faculty and staff would have clarities. And you yourself have probably changed buildings, and you've probably supported teachers that may have been veteran teachers in one district, but coming to another, or even changing schools within a given district. It's complex to know what the unwritten rules of the road are. So this creates transparency as to what's going to be expected for both students, faculty and staff, families, as well as administrators themselves. As I mentioned, at the core is also PBIS, positive behavior interventions and support, where we're teaching, practicing, and acknowledging kids for meeting expectations. And that's going to begin to create these safe learning environments. And in addition to that clarity on PBIS, I think one of the big themes of all of our work in terms of behavioral health is remembering that, the PBIS element it's not a curriculum, it's a framework. It's something that we're going to build based on the value and the culture of the community of the kids that we're serving there. And I think sometimes in times when things get stressful or things get lost, sometimes people forget that we've already got structures in place where we're creating positive, productive environments. And especially right now, as we are welcoming kids back into learning environments, and some kids haven't had really any kind of formal education in a consistent way for, more than 18 months. This is going to be a really big part about setting or resetting the value and the culture of the community that you're creating. So when we think about things like this, how many of you are in schools right now where you see these signs up, like to set expectations? If you don't mind, just pop up in your chat for the school buildings that you're in or the districts that they're in. Do you see evidence of clear expectations in like posters in the hallways, lessons taught during the day? And if you would, go ahead and open up your chat and type yes or type no as to something that whether or not you see visual evidence. Wonderful, seeing so many people. Great. And so this might be a common expectation in your work. And if I was to ask you the question of, is it being used well? Like, do you see people actually using this as an instructional tool? Do you see teachers that are teaching it as regularly putting these lessons back in front and then using it, like pre-correcting when you're getting kids ready to head out to the cafeteria or getting ready to head to a sporting event that night? We're reminding kids of what's expected, and we're setting kids up for success by making sure that they are clear of the expectations that they're walking into. And then part of the great utility of, PBIS is making sure that we have clear, kind, consistent expectations. And this is foundational to building relationships and building, constructive opportunities to exist between faculty and staff, as well as between faculty and staff and kids. Another key piece of Ci3T is in the building process, we walk through this mechanism by which we go through a manualized approach to helping people actually check out validated resources that can be used to skill build for students in terms of social and emotional well-being. And as part of Ci3T, we do have a manualized approach for building these models. And in it, there is not a, hey, you got to do this at tier 1. And instead, what we help people do is connect to resources like What Works Clearinghouse, and they can go in and you can go in and vet to see what has already been tried and tested in middle schools, in high schools, and in elementary schools. I put 3 up here today just as an illustration to show you some of the validated resources that have been adopted by some of our school and district partners. And just to make it clear as to what this looks like, is they go through an adoption process just like you would adopt a reading curriculum or science curriculum, and they bring it in. And it's not just counselors, school psychologists, and social workers going into classrooms to do this. The commitment is that the general education community, they're teaching this as part of tier 1 instruction. It is literally built into the instructional schedule. And the gift for all of you as counselors, school psychologists, and social workers is now, if you know what the base experience is that every single kid's getting, and if they're collecting data to know whether or not that's happening, treatment integrity data, then you will know how to best support kids that are still not responding to what's happening at tier 1. And really good programs that are selected have plans for non-responsiveness. Like in the social skills improvement system, there's class-wide lessons that are taught at tier 1, and then there's additional curricular resources that can be used in small groups. And that's why there's not like a clash of constructs or messaging to kids. It's leveling the playing field for every single student. So with respect to that social and emotional learning, it is well aligned with the CASEL competencies. And in these vetting processes, you're going to look to see what makes sense for your community. What makes sense in terms of, has it been tested there? Has it been validated to show what works for whom and under what conditions? And the importance of doing that is that we have learned in the scientific community that if you explicitly teach those skills, make the same commitment, just like you're teaching academics, we know that as kids acquire those skill sets, they begin to have improved attitudes about themselves, about others, and about schools. And then over time, then you start to see more pro-social behavior and fewer problems and less emotional distress. And when the pandemic did happen, this is a place where a lot of people immediately were trying to get guidance on, what do I do? How do I prepare for how do I support kids in terms of their well-being? And in schools that already had Ci3T systems in place, some of the messages that we heard back from superintendents and the like was that they felt relieved. They didn't have to go think about adopting a new approach to do it. They had one. They just had to implement what they had. And they also are expressing the same kind of gratitude for already having social skills screeners, like behavioral screenings in place to know what to do. So in terms of that third domain, again, vetting process, it's making a commitment to not just financially invest in one of these, but take the time to make sure there's initial and ongoing professional learning for with whatever is selected. And in this intentionality, this is also very helpful to think about it if you're in a district that makes good district-wide decisions as far as curricular adoption. In some of the communities that we've worked with, they've adopted the exact same curriculum for all elementary schools. And then some districts have the same curriculum for middle and high school. It would be rare to find a curriculum that actually can thread from kindergarten to high school, but they do exist. And so when you're looking at these, we're not looking for the next bright, shiny thing. We're looking for things with enough research behind them to suggest that if I do this with fidelity, then it is likely to yield this return for kids, because we simply don't have the time to waste. And in a Ci3T structure, that is what tier 1 is. And I want you to imagine that. So I want you to think about like Toby at his school or his district, like they're walking in, every single kid is going to get access to clarity on academics, on what's being taught and for how long and what it's going to look like. And they're going to get instruction on how to be respectful, how to be responsible, how to give best effort. And we're going to skill build in terms of those skills that some people refer to as soft skills and some people refer to as core skills, but making sure they have the skills that they need to take care of themselves in terms of their emotional well-being and protect their social interactions. And this is important. There was a guy, Michael Uden, and he gave this great keynote address at, I think it was a PBIS. And he stood up and he said, it is as important for us to spend as much time and effort in empowering kids with good behavioral competencies and social competencies as we do academics, because they're learning through the years that there's a lot of kids that graduate really, really fine in terms of academic competence, but where they're struggling is in their interpersonal relationships and their own emotional well-being. And that makes it hard to be successful in relationships and into employment. And I'm obviously at the University of Kansas, and Randy Watson, he's our key educational leader. He did a listening tour across Kansas and found the same thing, that's what employers were saying. More kids needed the support from preschool to 12th grade to be able to do well post-secondary in terms of outcomes. So when we're talking about Tier 1 together today, that's what we're talking about, the entire package, one integrated system that creates transparencies on what everybody's roles and responsibilities are going to be at Tier 1. Now, that is a tall order. It doesn't happen like over day. It's not happening. And Becky, I'm glad to see you you're nodding your head on that. Very reinforcing for me. It is not a one-hit wonder professional learning. It's a commitment. And just to let you know, the way it typically happens when a district or a school adopts this intention to build a Ci3T model of prevention, like if it was a district, they would build out a rollout plan, and they would have a portion of their schools. I don't usually recommend training an entire district at the same time because it can be overwhelming to the system. And I know some people that are here today have been attending other Ci3T professional learnings, including our Train the Trainers events. But imagine this, let's say you're in a district, and let's say you've got a feeder pattern of schools that have decided that they're going to start by building their Ci3T model. So in a room, you might have 10 teams from 10 different schools. And it might be some from elementary, middle, or high. Other districts roll it out where I'm going to train all my elementary first, and then my middle, and then my high. And some people do it the opposite way. They train high schools and then middle schools and then elementary, because those older kids aren't going to be there as long. So then they assemble a Ci3T leadership team from each of their schools. And it typically has the principal, who's the instructional leader for the school, 2 gen ed teachers, a special ed teacher, a person such as yourself, a social worker, a school psychologist, a counselor, a parent, and the child of a parent. And the child is typically 8 years old and is a returning kid. So you wouldn't bring in a high school senior. Then these teams come together for these 6 sessions, and these alternate between 2-hour sessions held after school and full days. And the kids only come to sessions 3 and 5, which are the after school ones. And they'll walk through this manualized, data-informed decision-making process to actually take this collection of empty blueprints, and they're going to organize all the wonderful happenings in their building so that everybody is clear on what the Tier 1 experience is, and they're clear on what's available if a kid needs more than Tier 2 has to offer or Tier 1 has to offer. Now, one thing that you should be aware of, for those of you who are committed to supporting people with professional learning, we have learned the following. And so when you look at this graph, this kind of details, this figure, this details like what that training experience looks like. And then after each sessions, teams meet with their faculty and staff to share pieces and get input. And after session 4, all these Ci3T leadership teams go back to their faculty and staff and say, here's a draft of what we are planning for Tier 1. And they fill out a measure called the Primary Intervention Rating Scale, the PIRS. And listen to this. We have learned that the faculty's views on social validity, what they think about the goals, the procedures, and the outcomes, their school site mean after session 4 actually predicts how well they implement it the next year. And that is key, because if their mean score is pretty high, that means we've built a program or a structure that they are believing in the goals, they believe the procedures are reasonable, and they think it will work. And if the mean score is a little lower than like the 80% target, then we know we've still got some work to do to make sure that we're building a plan that people are valuing. Because when we think about social validity, we've learned that if people are not on board with the goals at the beginning, it's really hard to move the needle for implementation. And as like Jennifer is nodding her head, so is Becky, it's a complex thing to build and support a system, but there's benefit in that clarity. And as I mentioned, tons of different ways to roll it out. There is not a one size fits all model for that, but it takes time. And this graphic is showing you one district's implementation journey. We partnered with them for a number of years, and they had 14 elementary schools that built their Ci3T model in 2013. Those dark green bars represent pretty intensive initial implementation efforts. And it's not like you just launch your system and go forth and it happens. Instead, of course, there's ongoing professional learning. And as they were starting their implementation, then we started working, training the middle and high school teams to build their model. And then third year was rolling out to their college and career. These yellow boxes represent sustained implementation. And I want to say this particular district has had 4 superintendents throughout this journey. And the model still sustains because there's clarity for people on what's happening at tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And to give you an idea of what this looks like, a glimpse into the content, these are covers of people's Ci3T implementation manuals shared with permission. And at the beginning, when they first started working on them, it was empty blueprints. And through this professional learning process that again is data informed, information is gleaned to establish a purpose, to establish the mission of what you're hoping to accomplish. And in the COVID era, when that happened, we also went back with people and modified to say, what is your goal right now as far as remote instruction as well? So these plans were quickly adapted in the COVID era to accommodate for kids that were in person and those that were remote, so that there could be seamless transitions for faculty and staff and families and kids, and also clarities from an administrative perspective on how to get it done. And on the website, if you'd like, if you go to ci3t.org/COVID, you can download this blueprint from this high school exemplar if you want to have something in front of you that details what this would look like. So now, let's say that we're further into this, and during the building process, some of the things that are going to get built out for faculty and staff is going to be active strategies that you can put into your instruction to maximize engagement and minimize disruption. So here in front of you is a list of some very efficient strategies. And at first glance, you might look at these and say, wow, these are just behavioral supports. These have nothing to do with instruction. And I like that Edna's smiling, because we know that these strategies, empowering the teachers with these strategies to use while they teach, that's the tipping point. So if I can build in things like instructional choice into a high schooler's day, that is going to be a motivator to get to class on time, stay there and engage. So it might be like in a middle or high school, like if it's a social studies class, there might be an option. There could be 2 journal prompts on the board, pick whichever one you'd like to respond to. Or if it's a math class, there might be 5 different, prompts or questions on the board, and you say, pick any 3 that you want. Just that small introduction of choice, there have been multiple studies to show that even letting a kid decide what they want to do first, that in and of itself is enough to increase engagement and limit disruption. And then there's also great strategies on increasing engagement. Some of you know, I've got 2 kids. I've got a son who's 25 and I've got a daughter. She actually turns 22 next week, and both are just fabulous, fabulous human beings. And they had some really fabulous teachers through the year. And I remember they both had the same Spanish teacher for a period of time. And they were just talking about this guy just recently. And I was asking about what did they love the most about his class? And what they were both said independently was that it was so engaging because of the way he taught. He had this routine, an entry activity. And I got to see this when I was there one day. He had this routine where kids came into the classroom. And if you've ever done custodial work, you're not going to like this example, but bear with me. So every kid, when they came in, got an expo marker, and there was a question on the board. He taught Spanish, and the question was in Spanish. And every single child had to stand up, take the expo marker, and they wrote the answer physically on the desk, not on a piece of paper. They're literally writing on the desk, which got to clean it off later. Yes, that's true. And thank you for Silky for laughing at that. So they would write the answer. They had to read it in Spanish, write the answer in Spanish, raise their hand, come over and read their answer to the teacher. And he was circulating, so actively supervising. They had to recite their answer to him. And if they got it wrong, he gave them corrective feedback in Spanish. They had to correct it. And then after all that was done, they got to sit down. So think about that as a starter activity. I'm speaking, reading, writing, and listening. Everything we hope a kid to do in terms of learning a new language, that was the starter activity. That was the first 7 minutes of class. What a gift, right? So we want to think about how to keep instruction engaging so that kids want to be there. And for the kid that's embarrassed about getting it wrong, that's even more of an incentive to get to class on time, so you can get through all that before your friends walk in the door and avoid feeling embarrassed. But those are just some of the strategies that you want to put in the hands of every single person that interacts with kids. When we think about that PBIS piece, it's not just a song, it's not just a poster, it's literally, it's teaching kids these expectations that are going to likely work to make their life even more efficient and effective. And in a Ci3T model, there's that survey I mentioned to you that you can give out that survey to all faculty and staff, and they rate which skills they think are most essential. And the way the team does the first draft of the expectation matrix is they go through and they pull in and consider every item that is rated by 75% or more of the adults as critical for success. And things like follows instructions the first time, that's a key one. Being able to resolve conflict, manage frustration, those are huge. So we want to make sure that these things truly are, from the adult perspective, helpful for helping the kid to be successful. So that's what gets taught and practiced and reinforced. And if it's remote or if it's in person, like if we were doing remote instruction right now and I was a teacher, I'd have that projected right here. And if you'd like, we've got samples of that on our website where you can just download and do it. But whether they're in person or they're remote, we want to make sure that the expectations are clear. And then when that decision is made on what to adopt to bring in, like if it was second step, you'd want to make sure that you're supporting people and building that scaffold, because there is a misconception. I remember in the early years of Ci3T, late 90s, early 2000s, some people thought, well, certainly the counselor is going to run in and teach every single lesson school-wide. That doesn't, and I like some people are smiling thinking that is not going to work. You're exactly right. It's not going to work. You might co-teach lessons together, but it's really important for the general education teacher and the special education teachers to build that into the daily instruction, because then as they're teaching those immediate skills to kids, then they can acknowledge kids who are using those skills later, and you can pre-correct the use of those skills in lessons. So when we think about things like, if I could teach one thing, like one skill to every single child, it would be empathy. You know, rather when somebody's like losing their mind in a classroom, rather than being frustrated for the way that kid's behaving, and if instead all of our first response could be, they must be really struggling. You know, I've been in that moment, and we've all had those moments where we're just not our personal best. And some of us have had those days where it's like, you know, you wake up and you feel like, I got to call in fat because what I planned to write, you know, wear, I can't wear, it doesn't button, doesn't zip, you know, I didn't have enough gas, you know, I didn't have an ego, whatever it is. But then if you have all those events that just make it a hard start to the day, if we could approach every person that was, you know, feeling a little scratchy that day to see like, what are they going through that is making them behave like that? Because I know they can be better. That's a different thing than just compliance. So in these instructional schedules, we want to make sure that we're empowering teachers to be able to do that. One of the high schools that we worked with, their district, there was 2 high schools in the district, and the way they did it, and I thought this was really genius. So this is their idea, not mine. But when they adopted, I believe they used Connect with Kids. And what they did is when they built their instructional schedule, they actually put it into the real estate of every instructional period. So the first lesson, and they did a lesson a week, and they taught it at the beginning of a week, and then it was used throughout the week. So first period taught the first lesson, then the next week, second period taught the second lesson, third week, and so on. So they thread it throughout every single instructional block so that every teacher got a chance to learn what those skills were. And it communicated to all 1,900 kids in each building, this is important enough that we're all doing this together. And so the nice part about doing it that way is that everybody's accessing it at the same time. And another district we worked in, the middle schools all taught it during advisory. They had a 20-minute advisory every single week. And that was the place where they taught those lessons. And it was a short period, but it was a more intimate, small group. They taught that. But again, all hands on deck. And it was at one elementary school, they did this really cute thing when they adopted their curriculum, and they taught it, and they did the same thing. They taught it a couple days a week, and somehow they got this deal with this pizza company. And so it wasn't pizza, but they got boxes. And in the boxes, like, were the lesson plans and the materials I needed to teach. And on the day of those lessons, all kids convened in the cafeteria. Whoever was teaching the lesson grabbed the pizza box, the adult, and they literally had everybody do it. Custodians, cafeteria workers, paraprofessionals. So it was very small groups, like 3 to 4, but it communicated to the kids, this is valuable enough that we're taking the time to do it. And everybody was participating. So as we're thinking about what tier 1 is in a Ci3T model. And I bet you dollars to donuts that you're already doing many of these things. It may just not be as transparent, or it may not be as consistent across every educator in your building. But in these plans, it's making a commitment to ensure that like lessons are taught with attention to engagement, that we've got a startup, we've got a way to pull kids in, set expectations for what they're supposed to learn, that there's a commitment to making sure that the adults in the building will get those foundational building blocks in their instructional repertoire, so that I can build in like huge levels of engagement, like that Spanish teacher, build in choice at the beginning of the day, remind kids before they head into small group discussions that words are powerful, they carry meaning, and what you do and do not say and how you do and do not participate changes your experience. In addition to teaching expectations, also part of positive behavior interventions and support is having a respectful way of responding when challenging behaviors happen. Like we want to make sure that when somebody is losing their mind in a classroom, that literally we first show empathy and we keep instruction moving forward. So we're not shutting down all instruction to bring attention to that. We're building it forward, we're maintaining it flow, we're acknowledging other kids who are meeting expectations. And then we're going to go back and redirect and reteach the expected behavior and give kids a moment to be successful, to get back on track, rather than, did you do it? Are you getting started or getting started? Because we can unintentionally escalate kids. And in those softs and those social skills that are taught, we need to be clear on what those are. And most states have requirements, like for communicating, like bullying prevention lessons, those need to be taught. And in these programs, you likely already have that. I was just in a meeting with a district implementer, and they've had a lot of change recently, but it was a great conversation. And we were, she was like, I know I got to get this bullying prevention lessons done. And our first thought was, okay, let's go to look at your curriculum that you've already got, that's already validated and that you're already using. Let's pull out those bullying prevention lessons and let's make sure that they're in everybody's instructional schedule. And I loved the moment on her face when she's like, that connection I hadn't made till right now. That was helpful. And that's why it's not enough just to build this. We all need ongoing professional learning to sustain it and to refine it and to innovate it. And thank goodness, like with Patton, you've got awesome professional learning opportunities. And in one of the grants we have right now, this is our whole mission of the work, is to build on-demand, free access professional learning resources to empower leaders, like principal leaders, district leaders, to build the capacity of Ci3T leadership teams to work with their faculty and staff. So it's a tall order, but it's totally doable. And when we talk about teaching, we're not just talking about teaching kids. The first thing is to teach all this to the adults, because we're going to change the student experience by first changing the adult experience. So we want to commit to every adult to support them in acquiring these skills, and then they're going to support the kids. Similarly, when we talk about acknowledging the kids for meeting expectations, absolutely. And we also want to do the same with the adults in the building. And it's interesting because on one of the treatment integrity measures that we have to see, like, is Ci3T in place as planned? One of the points of feedback that we look for is, do people report receiving acknowledgements from their leaders, like from their principal leader or their Ci3T leader? And that's often a place that sometimes gets overlooked in the beginning. So we need reminders. It feels good to get acknowledged when, and I don't know about you, but I even have something on my email, and I learned this from George Sagai. I have this little folder that says SR+. It stands for positive reinforcer for the behavioral people in the crowd. And that is where I drag and drop compliments that come in, like, or praise statements that come in. And I have a routine that on Easter, I open that up and I read them. Sometimes there's very few in there, but for me, that's a special thing. And I started it because I remember one year I got an email from George and it said SR+ in the subject line. And it was a praise statement about a study I had done. And I remember how good it felt in that moment. And I wanted to remember, thanks, Catherine. I wanted to remember how that felt, and I wanted to make sure to pay that forward. And so when you're thinking about the wonderfully complex job of meeting kids' multiple needs, I encourage us all, and if you are taking any kind of notes or jotting anything down, I'd like you to write that down right now, because we're going to make some actionable items at the end of the day. And I hope you'll consider a closeout practice for yourself at the end of every day to acknowledge at least one person that you have seen meet expectations, not necessarily exceed them, but meet expectations, whether it's teaching social skills or weaving it into instruction or using data to make decisions. So consider that, writing that down. Reinforcing. And then the last piece of this is monitoring. Like, how do you, anybody can make a great idea for a school. The question is, how do you get it in place? And so in this section about talking about monitoring day, we're going to actually talk about what do I need to know? Like, what do I need to know? Like, what information do I need to collect to see, is this in place? And I honestly believe that in addition to collecting treatment integrity in fall and spring, we have to make a commitment to give every educator a voice. Faculty and staff in fall and spring, in every Ci3T school, they complete that same measure that they did in training, that social validity measure, to say, here's what I think about the goals. Here's what I think about the procedures. And here's how I think it's working. And when we talk about data-informed professional learning, it's those pieces of information that are actually used to build the professional learning plans for schools, because they're telling you, like, these are the places, and this is the place where you're going to be able to see things like if there are themes and feedback about, like, behavior specific praise might be low on treatment integrity. And then you might go into your social validity comments and see that some people still are confusing it with bribery. And so we need to educate people. Bribery is when you're trying to get somebody to do something that's not in their best interest, drink it, smoke it, steal it. Whereas reinforcement, we're trying to teach kids behaviors that if they do more of that in the future, it's going to allow them to solicit and receive naturally recurring reinforcement. It feels great to get your work in on time because I'm not being asked to stay after. Nobody's calling my parents. Nobody's sweating me on that. So I can escape these uncomfortable feelings if I just do these things on time. Plus, it feels really good to learn something. And when we give kids novel experiences, challenging things, they report back that it feels really good. I remember a couple of years ago when my son, he had moved a couple times to different states, and I got a call from one state. He's like, Mom, I'm doing it. I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, I did it. I went and got my car registered. I got my car insurance. He's like, I'm actually adulting. I'm like, I'm doing it. And I remember the moment when I thought I should have encouraged that earlier. You know, sometimes we work so hard to make sure that, you know, kids never have any angst. We try to do as much as we can, but there's great joy in conquering the complex. And we need data to see how this is going for kids. But before we can interpret the kid experience, we've got to know what is taking place at Tier 1, because none of us want to be the person to say to a parent, your child needs more than Tier 1 has to offer, if we don't even know if Tier 1's happening. So that is in part why the data are important. So just to quickly recap, when we think about Tier 1 procedures for teaching, there is a plan in each of these plans as to the Ci3T leadership team is going to do these things to teach the faculty and staff. And then the faculty and staff are going to do these things to teach the kids. And so when we think about those procedures for teaching, it's not just slapping something up on a wall and thinking it's going to occur through osmosis. And when we talk about that idea of an integrated lesson experience, and I'm not suggesting that we ask people to write these lessons, but I think visually this can help people to understand the idea of integration before any lesson is taught. Not only having your academic objective, but creating clarity for kids. Like, now is a good time for us to use that skill that we have been talking about in our blank lessons, our second step, or our connect with kids. And then here's my expectation. Like today, when you're in these small groups, even if you hear somebody's ideas that are very different from your own, we are going to listen, we're going to acknowledge, and we're going to practice some of those calming strategies if it feels frustrating for us, which is our soft skills part. And when we talk about those low intensity supports, this is how they're going to move through the instruction, is really thinking like, which strategies can I use at which stage during instruction? Because I have to be honest with you, and I know you've probably seen it in your roles, when you go in to support teachers who feel like they're being mowed over by bad behavior in a classroom, rarely does a teacher come and say, I didn't get enough training on how to teach this content area. What they will come back and tell you is the behavior is hard to manage. And they'll come back and tell you, I don't feel like these kids like have the self-regulation yet to be able to manage these challenges. And that's why we're taking that on together, you know, with families on the Ci3T leadership team and seeing if those things are in place. So I'd invite you to think about these low intensity supports as being important to solid academic instruction. And I think each of you will hopefully, like some of the resources I'm going to share in a little bit, And I'm so happy to see that like in the chat, people are talking about the ways in which they're already using these things in new teacher induction. That is so great as you're welcoming new people into your system. So you might think about these as procedures for teaching. I also want to remind you that there's parallel resources built for families. So if you have kids that are home for quarantine or they're home regularly for online instruction or remote instruction, we hear from parents often, especially at the beginning of this. I remember some teary phone calls from some parents saying things like, I'm not a teacher. Like, I honest to God don't even know how to organize the day to do my job and help my kid do their thing. And how am I remember getting emails, how am I supposed to get them to do what they're supposed to be doing, you know? So we want to make sure we're also equipping families with these resources. So if you look on this COVID tab, setting up for success at home, you'll find things on helping families to build expectations for what it's going to look like at home and low intensity supports that they can use. And they're also translated into Spanish, because we also heard from some of our community partners that these are great, but not all my families access information in English. So I really need to have these accessible in other ways. So check out those as well. And when you're thinking about this idea of acknowledging or reinforcing, I just want to show you some of these sweet things that have been happening in some of our partner schools. These are illustrations of virtual postcards. Sometimes they're sent with this 30-second audio to say things like, I popped into your Zoom room today and I saw you doing blank. But just taking that rich moment, like we talked about, closing out your day, acknowledging adult that's doing something to support proper implementation so that you can support kids. That one on the upper left-hand corner was like a little snapshot from a principal on a Ci3T leadership team, and she sent it out to her whole faculty and staff. Once she saw those resources for families, she said, in your Friday email to families, you might consider sharing out this resource. So it's pushing out good information and recognizing people. We're not shaming people for what hasn't been done, because we've all got enough guilt and shame. Any of us who've read Brene Bradley, I think, or Brene Brown, are feeling pretty compelled by that. So think about the reinforcement, and also think about reinforcing for kids and some of the big ideas behind whatever your reinforcement structure is in your building or remotely. I beg you, please make sure that every adult can participate in it. If you have like a digital reinforcement system or a reinforcement system that only some adults can participate in, like if it's only the classroom teacher and it's like the custodian or the cafeteria worker or the paraprofessional or substitutes can't also participate in giving feedback, we're unintentionally teaching our kids we only have to pay attention to certificated people. And that's not the message we want to send. And as we help people to understand the art of reinforcement, we want to make sure that there's clarity. We want to reinforce things that are truly malleable, things that are within that child's repertoire, like in middle and high school in particular. Like, all kids are going to be motivated to either get some things or escape some things. Some kids are going to want attention. Some kids are going to want to escape it. Some kids are going to want, fun activities, and some kids are going to want to escape those same things. Like, some kids would love like extra time with friends or activities, and some people would just like a break from all the noise. Same thing with sensory experience. Some kids are gonna, your hummers and your tappers, they might love to trade in like 5 tickets for opportunity to listen to clean music on their headphones. And other people might want noise canceling headphones because the magnitude of the cafeteria is overwhelming. So think reinforcement structures. And then, as I mentioned, fall and spring, we need to know 2 things. We need to know, is it happening, treatment integrity? Because if you do not collect information on treatment integrity, it is just like a guy talking about his dating life in high school. Maybe it happened, maybe it didn't. You got to have the data behind it. Thank you, Gina. And then we also need that voice for people, that social validity to find out in fall and spring, are you still on board with these goals? Are these procedures working for you? Do you think this is working for kids? And it's not like you're going to get rid of reinforcement if somebody complains about reinforcement, but this will tell you where they need additional professional learning, and it will give you ideas as to where you need refinement. And then lastly, and a point we're going to talk on today, is this idea of systematic screening, making sure that we have the right tools, and we're literally checking 3 times a year to see how kids are doing academically, behaviorally, and socially. And even with all that in place, there's going to be kids that need more than Tier 1 has to offer. And I want to underline this and put an exclamation and a highlight and put it in red. It doesn't mean it's a bad teacher. It doesn't mean it's a bad kid. It means there's just additional need. And so today we'll talk a little bit about what those Tier 2 and those Tier 3 supports will look like. Just to keep the language systems consistent, there are no tier 2 kids. There are no tier 3 kids. There are kids that have tier 2 and tier 3 needs. Tier 3 in this model is not special education. Tier 2 is not pre-referral intervention team. These are teachers being able to connect kids to these supports. And remember, of course, it is a journey. And usually it's going to take about 2 to 3 years of high fidelity before we start seeing the movement. So that's why some of the initial goals I encourage you to set with your partners that you're supporting are not about changes in student performance. They're about fidelity. Let's get to fidelity. So like if anybody's ever done like a fitness or weight loss thing, rather than keeping track of like the amount of weight you're losing or, you know, improvements in strength, instead reinforce the behaviors you control. Like, am I doing my workout of the day? Am I, you know, logging my food? Those are the immediate things that if I follow through on those, then I'm going to see what we would refer to as more of a distal outcome. So as you're thinking about potential benefits for transparency, making sure that everybody knows what's happening, access, and this, please listen to this. If we are truly, truly motivated to address learning loss, and to address gaps in performance for different groups of kids, we must make sure that kids have equal access to these extra supports. So if we want to address gaps in performance, we must address gaps in access, which is why we have to look at those data collaboratively to see what kids need. So right now, I'm going to invite you to go into a breakout room. And in that breakout room, I'd like you to focus on the success right now. So let's set some positive momentum. When you think about the schools and the systems that you're supporting, which of these elements do you already see in place? Like, are you using tiered fidelity inventory? Do you have behavior screenings? I know a number of you use the SRSSIE. Do you have, a lot of you already have PBIS. Do you have that same commitment to social and emotional well-being? So we're going to pop into a breakout room right now, and we're going to invite you to enjoy 15 minutes in this small group discussion. And look to be pulled back in about 12 to 13 minutes. We have just a couple minutes to wrap up. So go enjoy the time, and we'll see you back here, me and all my personalities. Just great. So expectations are established and acknowledgement systems are established. That's great, Courtney. And other people, something that you feel like is going really well in the place that you're working. Terrific. That's great to hear that somebody's got a SEL curriculum already in place. Solid tier 1 at high schools. Great, Erica and Becky. Good. And as you're considering these successes, the next question I have for you is, where are you at with systematic screening? And as you listen to this next little segment, I'd like you to be thinking about right now in your systems, how are you currently looking for kids that might have additional challenges, like might have higher than average internalizing issues or higher than average externalizing issues. And so when we think about systematic screening, just like academics, where we want to check in 3 times a year, we want to do the same thing for middle and high school kids all throughout their K through 12 experiences. We actually want to check 3 times a year to see how kids are doing in terms of social and emotional well-being. And there are many wonderful validated systematic screening tools. And I'm not here today to tell you what all those are and walk through that. I know Patton has invested some really great time and professional learning to help people make those decisions about the range of opportunities that are there. But if you are interested on that Building Your Ci3T Model tab, there's a little handout that you can download. It's the 10th resource, so resource 10, that has like a quick little summary of what those tools are. But in general, when you think about systematic screening, we're talking just about teacher completed systematic screening so that we can check quickly 3 times a year in fall, winter, and spring to see how kids are doing in terms of internalizing and externalizing behavior patterns. And there's just a couple important distinctions between traditional academic screenings and behavior screenings. Academic screenings you can do as soon as the kids come back from summer break. Behavior screenings, you wait 4 to 6 weeks. You screen the first time, then you screen again in winter before they head out for winter break. And then we screen again in spring. And we're looking to see overall how kids are doing. And we're going to use that information in a couple ways. I'm just going to show you one screening tool and show you a little bit about how it can be used in this way. But I want to emphasize there's wonderful commercially available tools that do the same. This one is the student risk screening scale for internalizing and externalizing. And it's one of the last free access screening tools that are available. And I know this has been widely used across Pennsylvania and some fantastic applications in districts. And I know like Becky, who's on the call today too, I know she was in one of the original districts that did some work there. But essentially, imagine in a system that every single kid is screened in middle and high school. And listen to this, it is not every teacher screening every kid in every class. Instead, in a middle school or high school, you would decide on the one period of day where you want those screenings to occur. And it's a little bit more complicated than it sounds, especially at high school, because you got to make sure all kids are present in the building. So I remember one of the high schools we worked with in Kansas, the only option was 5th period, because every other period of day, that's the period that backed up against lunch. And every other period of the day, the kid could be at a bridge program for college or something for voc ed. So it was very hard to find people that were all there. But essentially, when you think about that rating scale, it looks like this, and it's pre-populated. So let's say you decided to do screenings in 2nd period. So every single teacher's 2nd period roster would be uploaded into that with the kids' names and IDs. And then you think about one student and you rate across and you get 2 total scores. And at the middle and high school, there are different cut scores, but in general, these scores are summed up to have 1 score for internalizing, 1 score for externalizing. And then that information is used to place kids into different risk categories. And I want to show you these progressions, how you can use these from elementary all the way through high school. These are data from one school that has been screening since 2014. So the green represents the percentage of kids at low, then the yellow is the moderate, and then the red is high. And this creates transparencies so that you can see at a glance how it's looking in that school over time. And this fall 20, these people are getting ready to screen right now. This was screening in the COVID era. So this was at the fall of last year this time. And I think part of the reason that risk was so low in these schools is they had a structure in place and kids were really, really happy to be getting back to time with friends and things. We also saw similar patterns for internalizing issues. And I have to say, like in traditional methods of measuring how things are going at tier 1, oftentimes people have relied on office discipline referrals. And we've learned that you can say, like kids in that October poll, if kids have 0 to 1 office discipline referrals, they're in the green. If they have 2 to 5, they're in the yellow. If they have 6 or more, they're in the higher risk category. But my major concern as a mother and as a researcher is that we will overlook kids with internalizing issues if we're only relying on office discipline referral. And I see Lisa nodding her head on that. So preach. So, and Kent McIntosh, pandemic praise for your girl. Kent McIntosh has done some really great work on that to solidify that, screening is important, especially if you want to find both major challenges of early childhood. And then in your data meetings, you're going to be able to break out what does this look like. So I get like this snapshot for school as a whole, but then I can unpackage it to see where pockets of challenges might be. And in this school, everything's in pretty good shape. But if you would, in the chat, please tell me if you were going to go in and do some focused interventions or take a closer look at one grade level based on these data, what grade level would it be? And if you could put that in the chat. Great. And just as Jeffrey and Carol and Sarah and others are trying to do, it's a quick answer, right? Because I'm able to look to see, although still in really good shape, you've got 82% of kids in 2nd grade in the low risk category. I've got 14% that have moderate risk. That's the grade level that's having the biggest challenge at this point. And I can also tell you that through the years, we've learned that those fall data actually predict how well kids do end the year academically and behaviorally. Like at the elementary level, we know that those fall screenings predict how well they read in terms of oral reading fluency. It predicts the number of nurse visits that they have. And I'm not saying the nurse is a bad thing, but the fact that they need to go to the nurse so often, that's something that we should be paying attention to. And it also predicts suspensions. At the middle school and high school, we see exactly the same patterns. I want to show you these data, and I pulled these because of this group in particular. I wanted to show you screening's not new. These screening data are pulled from a middle school starting in 2004. And this shows you their first 8 years of screening. And as you notice, the percentage of kids in the green gets bigger and bigger and bigger up until right here. And then in this one year in 2008, I always feel like I have to say results are not typical. It's like those weight loss commercials. You would typically expect to see like 3 to 5% of the kids scoring in as having tier 3 needs. But this was a particularly successful year. Now, the next year, they started to see a slight increase. And what they did is they went back and looked at their fidelity data at tier 1, and they realized that as they had onboarded new people, they had not done the training of new people, right? So that it's like, oh yeah, I got to remember to do that. So they did booster sessions, they retaught, and then they developed this new plan where they continued professional learning for faculty and staff as they welcomed people back and kept it going through the years. Just like any other place, like some people are wondering, is that really true? Does it work in the middle school years? And absolutely, we've learned that these fall scores, check this out right here. These fall scores for that first year that they screening, because they wanted to be sure it was working, they learned that the fall scores at the very beginning of the year, so the kids that started off in the green, by the end of the year, they earned 1.5 office discipline referrals. Kids that started off the year in the yellow, they earned about 5. And then the kids that start off the year at high risk, they earned by the end of the year 8, which means one teacher rating one set of kids, that score actually predicted how many office discipline referrals they earned. It also predicted the number of days those kids spent in on-campus suspension. And then for everybody who says, oh, that's great, but I don't care because I've just got to focus on my academics, check out grade point average and check out course failures. The fall scores in the middle school did predict end of the year grade point average. So kids that started off the year with less risk did better academically. And in middle school, to fail in middle school, you means you have to not turn your stuff in. Look at this. The kids that start off the year in the green, they failed on average less than 1 class. The kids that started off the year with moderate risk, they failed almost 3. And the kids that started off the year in the high risk, they actually ended the year with failing over 4 classes. So same thing is true. And this has been replicated time and again. Teachers are really accurate tests. So these screening tools, like the one I'm showing you right now, it takes 15 minutes to screen your entire school. They're typically done in a regularly scheduled faculty meeting in fall, in winter, in spring. And we know that those internalizing and externalizing data in the fall predict very important outcomes. And when we get into the high school level, we've even learned that spring scores, now listen to this, spring scores in 1 year predict the entire next year for the kid. So teachers are amazingly accurate and the tools work well. And you're going to want to check out all the predictive validity stuff for any screening tool that you would consider adopting. I want to show you these data, and these are particularly meaningful to me because these were sent to me by one of our high school principals. And he's like, hey, Kathleen, I know we're in our 3rd year of implementation. One of our math teachers mentioned we could start looking at trends. So check this out. These are data that he sent to us. So this top one shows internalizing. So this goes 2016, 2017, 2018. So when they first started implementing Ci3T, they had 80% of their kids that had tier 1 needs for internalizing. And then within 2 years, that's at 90%. When they began, and you can't draw causal conclusions because this is not a randomized control trial, this is just descriptive, but check this out. Now they started their experience with 10% of the kids at low risk or at moderate risk, then it dropped to 4, then it dropped to 3. So the percentage of kids with tier 3 needs is decreasing. And then kids with external or the internalizing issues in the high risk category drops from 9 to almost 6 to 5. And I want you to think about your jobs, like those of you that are school psychologists, counselors, social workers. Now you don't have to go into a class and say, do you have anybody? Do you have anybody? You know, it's like anyone. Like the Ferris Bueller days of finding kids that need support are done, right? Now I can look at data, and if kids are not responding to tier 1, I've got greater clarity on who might need additional supports. And these data look like Disneyland data to me in the sense that that same pattern showed true for kids that had higher than average externalizing issues. So I want to show you this, and then I want to ask the question, as you're thinking about systematic screening, fall, winter, and spring, screening tools can take anywhere from 15 minutes to 35 to 40 minutes for the school, not an individual kid. And I want to ask you the question, is this worth it? Is it worth that much time to figure out who is likely to fail, who is likely to struggle? And I think unequivocally, the answer is yes, right? And we know that in high schools, when we look at those fall scores, they do predict grade point average, course failures, nurse visits, office discipline referrals. And what a gift it is when you can put screenings in place in a system and not wait for that child to earn that many office discipline referrals or fail that many classes. Because the God's honest truth is, by the time a kid has earned 4, 5, 6 office discipline referrals, people can feel on the other side of constructive. And sometimes we're running out of gas to have the energy to support that. Now, I do want to mention that in many cases, there's not much distinction between kids that have moderate or high risk at the beginning of the year, which means we should pay attention to any sign of risk at the beginning of the year. And our first line of defense is tier 1. Providing that integrated approach to tier 1 to meet kids' multiple needs is important. And there's miles to think about and grow in terms of systematic screening. We got to be careful that we're sharing it with only the people that are permission to have it. We do not need to share item level data. There should be no decisions happening on like, oh, Kathleen got a 3 for steal, she needs a stealing intervention. The data don't work that way. It's coming together, look at the composite scores, but they're powerful. They're just as screeners. So they should definitely be used in conjunction with other information. And on the website, you're welcome to download if you'd like. There's even templates so that if your schools are doing screening and you want to help them to summarize these in ways that allow them people to get a snapshot in time, by all means, feel free to do that. In many of our schools, this would be an example of what their year-long journey looks like over a couple of years. So they keep these data at the forefront, and these are communicated regularly to faculty and staff, and those successes are shared and those transparencies are shared. And in these same schools, when they welcomed kids back this year, they're getting ready to screen right now. And their plan is, if they have like higher than average internalizing issues, like if it's more than 15%, they're planning on pulling in more lessons from their social and emotional well-being curriculum and addressing those at tier 1 so that they have a plan to respond to it. So as we head into this next breakout room, I want you to think about and hopefully visit about the potential value of having screening data so that I can look at my school as a whole on 2 big dimensions. I could break it apart by grade level or classroom. I could look at 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, and I'm going to be able to use it for individual connections. I want to emphasize that before screening, though, you would want some coordination with your district so that the same tools are being used at the same levels across the district, because you want to be able, like if boundaries are withdrawn or kids move, we want to communicate clearly with families. But in this next conversation, and if you want to draw on some additional resources, and I will continue to pop into some of your rooms, and thank you for welcoming me the last time I was there. If you want to look at more of these resources on systematic screening, they're on this tab, including some guidance on what to do about screening in the COVID era. You'll find an accordion that has some additional information on other screeners that you may or may not be using. So know this resource is there. And again, this is on the systematic screening one, not this one that says project screen, but this one that says systematic screening. So I'm going to invite you to go enjoy your next conversation. And I'd like you to think about what could be some of the potential benefits of systematic screening if you're not doing it already. And if you are doing it, I'd love for you to share in your group about how that's working. So go ahead and enjoy about 10 of these 15 minutes, and we'll catch you back in just a little bit. Thank you. Appreciate it. As you think about real life happening, your lawn being mowed, screenings coming into your community, you want to do education on that. And it's very important that just like when you bring in any screening tool, that is vetted, it's understood, the information of how it's going to be used is understood. Like families need to know that it's not like the data are going to be used to exclude your child. It's actually used to inform instruction, to shape their experience. So it's not that like a kid scores in the high risk category, so they're not going to be taken on this sporting event or allowed this opportunity. Teachers use these data to shape instruction. one of the high schools that we worked in, there was a high school that was teaching, or teacher was doing some kind of AP class, and I think it was a lit class, and she was really struggling. Like, kids were not talking. It was like the cone of silence. Anytime questions were asked. She used her fall screening data and found, looking at the screenings, that she had a lot of kids with moderate to high internalizing issues. So conversations were not happening, likely because it was causing angst for the kids. So she adjusted her instruction. When she posed questions, she got kids to jot down some ideas, and then she had them have like shoulder partners. So then there was a conversation with like just a partner, and then it shaped a small group. And then eventually, over time, as she built the relationship and the trust with those kids, it shifted. That had she not had those data, she wouldn't have necessarily known what the root cause was. It's not that they weren't doing their readings and things. It's just they were worried about, the angst that comes with public speaking and maybe getting it wrong when you're a perfectionist. Another thing that came up in one of the groups is we talked about the importance of making sure that the communication is not just internal into schools, but it's with your community. So doing a lot of dripping of information on professional learning. Most every district that I've ever worked with has a letter that goes home from the district saying, welcome back. We are, in addition to doing reading screenings and vision and hearing, we are also now adding these screenings to see how your child's doing in terms of emotional well-being. Here's what it is. Here's what it's going to look like. Transparency being the key. So as you think about the potential value of systematic screening, I don't have to sit and wait and wonder who needs what in a middle school and a high school. I actually have opportunity now to have teachers get the additional source of data. And it's not the only data sources that's going to be used, but those data are going to be used together with academic data, attendance data, to understand like what this child needs. So that's part of how we're going to support the whole experience. So when you come back from your 15-minute break, we're going to actually shift into the role of screening and how to use screening to shape instruction. And those of you that are here today as teachers, as well as school psychologists and counselors, we're going to talk to you about how you can do this at tier 1 for all, and put some low intensity supports in people's hands, and then connect kids to supports. So enjoy a 15-minute break. And I really want to give a shout out to the people who are still trying to engage. I know you've got storms going on there. So thank you for being present, even if you can't have your video on, and I will look forward to seeing you back in 15 minutes. A chance to think a little bit about systematic screening and about the potential use. And I want to go through now just a little set of illustrations about how you might use screening data along with other data that you collect as part of regular school practices to shape instruction and other supports for students. So when we think about what we just discussed at tier 1, that happening, ideally that's building the base for an approach for teachers, general ed, special educators, related service providers, et cetera, to all think about how to support the child holistically in terms of tier 1, and with a clear path on how to use data to move kids through the tiers. I want to emphasize that it does not mean that every single student that automatically is shows up in the yellow or in the red absolutely needs to go to directly to a tier 2 or tier 3 support. We really need to look at the school as a whole. Like if you had 40% of your kids screening in is having tier 2 needs for reading, you would, for reading, think of that's a tier 1 issue, right? That something was going on at core that needed to shift. The same would be true, like if it was internalizing issues, we want to think about what could we push in at tier 1 to support that need if it was a universal need. When we think about looking at the tier 1 experience, I want to take a moment to like look at the data that you get from multiple sources of information for the school as a whole. Like if these were your data from a school, this is the CIS Performance Screening Guide, and it gives information on reading, math, pro-social behavior, and motivation to learn. This particular school at this time did not have anything in place at tier 1. So there wasn't PBIS. It was the principal described it kind of like the wild, wild west. You know, everybody could teach how they wanted to teach, when they wanted to teach. And this approach, I would suggest, and I think she would agree, it wasn't working. They had less than half of the kids meeting expectations in reading, math, pro-social behavior, and motivation to learn. This is a very clear case of where the first line of defense is going to be to intervene at tier 1. So think about introducing some commonalities, setting some school-wide expectation, because even for the most talented kid, it is confusing if expectations are different in every room and the curriculum is not as consistent. These data that I showed you a few moments ago from a middle school, this is looking like it's in pretty good shape in terms of tier 1. And now I've got transparencies as to who might need more than tier 1 has to offer. And I love talking to the guy that he started off being the vice principal at the school at the beginning, and over time he became the principal at this school. But at the end of his term as a vice principal, he at one point said to me, he said, Kathleen, I feel like my job has completely changed since we started doing this. And I'm like, tell me more about that. And he said, I feel like I used to be a disciplinarian and now I feel like an interventionist. He said, when we do these screenings, and I love that you're smiling, Silky. It's like when he said, when we do these screenings, he's like, I pull this information down. I pull down their course failures. I pull down their attendance. And he said, and my first conversation is with the kid to say, here's what we're looking at. How can we best help? And there was a palpable difference, like a different feeling in that school. Their school climate survey showed that. So I want to say that screening, you start by looking at the school as a whole. And I was in one of Catherine's breakout rooms, and she was talking about, messages that we've talked about from years and years ago about before you screen, you got to have a plan to intervene, right? The first plan has to be, plans for what's going to happen at tier 1. And then the second part of that plan is thinking about what else do I need to do, in terms of tier 2 and tier 3. And we would argue that even before thinking about connecting a kid to a tier 2 or a tier 3 support, the next thing is to help teachers take a look at their class to see what kids' multiple needs are and think about how they might use their own data to shape instruction. These are hypothetical data. These are not real data, not real kids' names, because then we wouldn't be sharing them. But if these were, let's say, from a 6th period or 7th period or 2nd period class, imagine in your information system if teachers could be empowered to pull down benchmarking, like for reading, math, externalizing, internalizing, office discipline, referrals, and attendance, and then look across. Because this is a very, like if I look at this right here, this is like math is, something's going on here with math, right? Not going well. There are so many kids that have more, additional needs. That's a tier 1 issue. That if I only looked at one source of information, I'm going to miss the total picture. Like look at this child right here. This kid has tier 3 needs for reading, tier 2 needs for math, tier 2 needs for externalizing behavior, tier 2 needs for internalizing, tier 3 needs for ODRs, and then attendance has also tier 3 needs. And the deal on attendance, it doesn't matter why the kid's missing school necessarily. If they're missing on average more than 1 day a month, so more than 10 days a year, they're at heightened risk for school failure. This is a totally different approach to intervening. Like my first goal for that kid is to get the kid to come to school, right? Because school is a must be present to win game. So this does not mean the child needs 7 different interventions. This kid needs something that is integrated, like something to get the kid to come to school. Feel free to stay all day. It's free. It's one of the last times it's going to be free in terms of your education. And if I've got a kid who has like tier 3 needs for reading and also has internalizing behaviors, I'm going to put these things together. I'm like, if I'm going to put that kid in an extra reading support, I'm probably also going to have to give a behavioral support to help that kid stay engaged. So let's say it's like a 6th grade kid that's not on track for reading, and they might go to a tier 2 reading. I might also need to give that kid like 6 paper clips and say, I promise not to call you on you in reading today, because I know that stresses you out when we're in that small group together, but I do need you to participate. So every time you contribute or answer, just feel free to move a paper clip into your other pocket. And when they're out, you're out. You don't have to participate anymore unless you'd like to. But then I'm removing the anxiety of being called on in a small group, because that can be stressful for a lot of kids. Another kid, if they had higher than average externalizing behavior, like this kid, and also had tier 3 needs for reading, I might put that kid in a tiered support for reading. And for that same kid, I might say, I know this is really hard to stay focused and attend to this. So I want to give you a self-monitoring intervention to help you stay engaged, and I can build that together. So thinking about how these go together. And to that end, one of the things that we did put in place that I think you might find immediately useful, and if you are here today as a classroom teacher, I think this could be good for you, or if you're somebody that's directly supporting classroom teachers, on the professional learning tab, you'll find these little accordions. And if you click these accordions open, there's everything you would need to go do that extra support like in a classroom. So instructional choice, there's a little implementation checklist on how to set up, like build your menu of choices you're comfortable offering, and then how to build those into your lesson plans, like when to offer them, how much time to wait. So it's very simple and it's very packaged. In some of the districts that we've worked with in years past, like there were some BOCES in New York, they did a great job. They brought in all the people that provided these pieces, like these extra support. They brought in all their trainers. They all used these same materials so that it was consistency of messaging, because sometimes it is frustrating. And as a former teacher, like sometimes like you go to these trainings and there's like, here's 6 steps to do self-monitoring. Another one has like 5, and here's 15 easy steps. So it's all uniform. It's done to program for generalization. And great question, Sarah. Yes, absolutely. There is a family component to this. You'll actually see these same strategies modified for family use, and parents are on the teams. When you click inside these little accordions, if you will, you'll see those intervention materials. And then to Sarah's point in the chat, we also have supports for teachers that are working in remote conditions and for families. So if you look on the COVID tab of responding to COVID, you'll see these same strategies here, like teaching a parent how to do behavior specific praise. Like there's no magic in the ticket, right? It's the feedback that comes with it. And it's giving very explicit feedback to shape behaviors that you want to see more of. And you'll also see that these resources are translated into Spanish, as I mentioned a little while ago. And if I was to go open up one of these and see what it looks like, here are some of the things that you would see. In those little accordions, you'll find pre-made PowerPoint presentations that you can go use so that you can all be on the same page for how those get taught and practiced and reinforced. There's a checklist to set up for success. And if you do intend to see how this works for some kids that have tier 2 needs, like this can be done more intentionally as a tier 2 support. So like if Emily is supporting a student that has tier 2 needs for maybe externalizing behavior patterns and productivity, like maybe they're not turning in work, she might say, to the teacher, let's give this a shot. Let's do the choice for the whole class, and let's collect data on Kathleen and Edna to see how this is working for them. Does this actually result in improved engagement and minimized disruption? So it's done as a class-wide intervention, but you're collecting information to see how that goes for kids. And everything you need for each of those is right there for you. Also, going back to that point of remembering that not everybody's in person right now, there's also that parallel set of remote supports. And some people, it was great during the initial days of the pandemic. They're like, hey, that's great. I'm glad you've got that stuff there, but I don't have time to read 2 pages, make me an infographic. So we made infographics, and they're like, okay, that's great, but I don't even have time to read the 1 page. Could you make me a video? So then we started making videos, and they're like, hey, we can't understand the videos if they're all in English. Could you make them in Spanish? So we made them in Spanish. So if there's other things that you see like would be useful to you in your role, Karen, I see you smiling. So if there's something here that's of use to you, please, by all means, feel free to use it. And we hope that these are seen as they are intended. There are ways to support equal access to the instruction, because it's not going to be a one size fits all. And who is serving as the teacher is going to vary for kids as they're going to going back and forth. The other thing that people, thanks, Beth, we aim to be very UDL friendly. The other thing that we had an ask for is, could you just like show me, like tell me specifically what would this look like start to finish, like in a middle school or in a high school? So on the screen, like I'm showing you some illustrations, like you can look on the ones on there that say example. So every time you see yellow, that's an example of what it's going to look like with a middle or high school kid. And it just walks you through what that journey would look like. And the blue is like using it at home with an elementary age student. So those are some resources that are specific. And when you think back to this thing that I showed you earlier about integrated instruction, It's not that you have to do every single strategy, every single moment of every single lesson. It's just like putting all these cool things in your repertoire so you know what to do when. And this I would think about as kind of an intermediate step between tier 1 and then more formal tier 2 supports like check-in, check-out, self-monitoring. Like think about like as a teacher, that fake data that I showed you that said, man, this class is a hot mess. If that was my class, if that was my hot mess, 7th grade, 5th period or something, if I had that many kids with that much color, then I would be asking myself, the question is, what is the smallest shift I can make in my instruction to increase engagement and minimize disruption? And that's the stuff I would do as a teacher. And it feels good for teachers because it's a much easier to spend your time teaching and reinforcing and acknowledging than it is to be following up with, redirects. So again, lots of resources there. You will also see some additional supports if you're doing things right now, like check in, check out, and you might want to lean into other behavioral supports, like using high probability requests, especially with some of the younger kids, or building momentum with some of the older kids. And we talked about earlier in the morning about some ideas for increasing opportunities to respond. So just know that these are there, they're there for you, and they are intended to be consistent. And there was a few years ago, we had written a book called Managing Challenging Behaviors, and it's a brown book. And at the end of a presentation like this, but in person, this lady came up to me and I wish to God I had written down her name. She's like, Kathleen, I love listening to you present. She's like, but if we knew what to do when you say, just rattle off instructional choice, increase opportunities to respond, pre-correction, she's like, we would be doing it. She's like, if you really want to be useful, write down all the steps. And that's the next book you should write. So we did. The next year we wrote that book. And then we made these parallel resources. So these are all the professional learning. So we're trying to make sure you can access it however you want, like what Beth was talking about. So these same steps, like on how to do instructional choice, if you find an article by our research team, you can read that article. You can log into this website. Some people do book studies on this, but the idea would be multiple ways of getting these approaches, these strategies, these practices, and these programs built in the capacity of your building. And this, what I want to show you is some schools do it like this. And I think this is very cool. A lot of the schools we do work with, they develop on-site coaches. So for their full faculty and staff, the expectation in their building is everybody is a learner on one strategy and a coach on another. So like one of the high schools that we worked with, like there would be like 5 people that could be the go-to people. If you want to learn how to do instructional choice, go to them and they'll show you how to do it. And then you self-identify as I'm going to be a learner on another strategy. And we have a tool that can help you to decide where should I be a coach, where should I be a learner. And then one of the districts that we worked with in Illinois, and one of the districts there, they actually did it where everybody, this was probably 10 years ago, but they had like these little boxes that looked like toolkits. There was like plastic clicky shut lids that hold hanging files on them. So if you were the instructional coach for increasing opportunities to respond, you literally had a bucket that had this stuff in there. This is when we were just getting started building the website, but everything you needed, like here, they could say, here's the steps, let's put this together, which kids, let's look at your data, which 2 kids do you want to track data on. So it was literally like these buckets. So anyway, just an idea. And the reason for that is some people have shared with us that they feel like their principal likes 5 people in the building. So those 5 people become the coaches for everything. They're on every team, they make all the decisions. And there's a lot of talent in building. So the idea of everybody committing to being a coach on something and a learner on something was also to level the expectation that we're all still growing. You don't have to be perfect. And people have done the coolest things with this. They've done things like some schools have done like a book study, and each person, they have a different person that rotates for a chapter a month, and they introduce a chapter a month. Another district, they did it where they did a strategy a semester. And so their expectation was that anybody that interfaces with kids got the instruction, and they did these little checks for understanding to make sure they got it. But the idea was focus on positives, focus on antecedent-based interventions, setting the stage for this, and learning how to do things that are more constructive rather than reactive. So just a couple of thoughts. And in your notes for today, if you would, like in your notes, can you write down for yourself that you're going to take 15 minutes at some point, and it might be when you're done doing the survey at the end of the day, just to go explore some of these resources on here so that you can check these out. We will have one more talk time together today. And if you're tired of talking to your friends and colleagues, you might just choose to use your 15 minutes right now. Caroline, thank you for laughing at that. So you might decide to do it then, but I'd really encourage you to go check it out and see what resources might be immediately useful. So we've talked about tier 1. We've talked about looking at your data, see if that's the need. We've talked then about empowering teachers with these low intensity teacher delivered supports that are built into instruction. And then I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what it looks like in a Ci3T model when we are talking about doing tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. All right, so in your own repertoire, you've got things going on. In some of the breakout rooms I was in, I was hearing people say, we do check in, check out. I heard some people say they do self-monitoring interventions. Will you please so kindly open up your chat and just pop in, like, what is a tier 2 support you already have in your building? Something that you got going on. Thanks, Nicole. Eric, I'm glad you like that idea. Good, lots of check in, check out. Social skills groups, fantastic. Lunch bench, good. Love it. So we've got some different things in place. What about tier 2? Oh, fantastic. What are you about tier 2 for academics? Just out of curiosity, when you've got a kid that needs more than tier 1 has to offer. Are there any kind of reading groups? Are they put into a different class? How do you tackle like study skills or reading skills? And it might still be in development. Good. Core extension intervention period, enhancement classes. And I like how you say enhancement too, because tier 2 doesn't have to just be about remediation. It can also be about stretching kids that need to be stretched. Oh, I love that. What I need extensions. Great. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, keep in mind the great things that you're doing. And let's take a look at tier 2 in a Ci3T model. One thing that we do not do is we do not have separate lists for here's the behavior supports, here's the social skills supports, here's the academic supports. There's one master list, and we call these intervention grids. So there's secondary or tier 2 intervention grids. And the intent here is to make transparent what is available in the building for kids who need more than tier 1 has to offer. And it can be enrichment, and it can be for kids that are not yet to where they need to be, like kids that are below benchmark, essentially. And the reason for these tier 2 grids is, again, to have this way of communicating clearly amongst every adult in the building, because there's awesome things happening, but most people would be hard pressed to name every extra support in a building, because there's things that people just do out of history without a lot of formality behind it. And it's also a way to communicate to families and to the students themselves, this is what we can do to support you if you have these challenges. So when we think about tier 2, we want to think about this as just an increase in intensity. And it's not necessarily that if I have higher than average behavior challenges and lower than average reading that I need 2 separate interventions. We want to think about putting those together in an integrated fashion. So when I think about integration and I think about tier 2, I'd like you just to listen for a second to this story to kind of learn a little bit about how we conceptualize tier 2. So I am 54. I turned 55 next month, which I'm really excited about. My daughter started CrossFitting when she was a sophomore in high school. And at that time, the year before that, my son was a senior in high school, and Tina and Catherine have heard all the years and stories of my kids. But for my son's senior year, I'm like, good news, bud. I have cleared my schedule. I'm going to do very little presenting. I'm going to hang out with you your senior year. We can just spend this last year together. Jennifer's smirking, right? And Erica's openly laughing, because no boy wants to hang out with their mom during their senior year of high school. So newsflash, learn that. So kind of missed that mark. So Katie, she's in her sophomore year. And I'm like, Bug, I know that time's going to go by fast. I want to spend much time with you as possible. And I said, how about we go to yoga together or something? And I'm 48 at the time. And she's like, no offense, Mom, but yoga is kind of for older ladies, and I'm not going to do that. I'm like, okay. So we go, I'm like, how about Zumba? Let's go to a Zumba class together. I love music. And she's like, great, let's go do a Zumba class. We go in one time, and I breaking it down. I'm thinking I'm fairly awesome. And Gina, that is exactly right. My daughter walks out and she's like, that can never, ever happen again. Not going to happen. She's like, if you want to spend time with me, this is where we can go. You can come with me to my CrossFit gym. And how many of you do CrossFit? Raise of hands. Anybody? Constantly varied, functional fitness, high intensity. All right. So we walk into this room, And she's obviously been doing this for a while. And I do what every good middle-aged mom who's had 2 children has done. I put on a very large pair of sweats and I walk into this room, and the very first activity was jump rope. Let me just reemphasize, I've had 2 children, I'm middle-aged, and it was jump rope. Okay, yes, Caroline's shaking her head. So disastrous. After the warm-up, which that was, the coach says, all right, if anybody needs to use the restroom before the next activity, feel free to do it now. And I'm thinking this dude so could have benefited from pre-correct as a strategy. Anyway, so then the next thing that happens is pull-ups. So my daughter jumps on that rig and she's just going to town. She's doing her thing. And this guy was great. He's like, Kathleen, come here. And he gets this giant rubber band and he ties it on that rig. And then like I get my leg in there and I go to pull and nothing is still happening. He's like, you need 2 rubber bands. So then I get a second rubber band and I'm hanging. And then all of a sudden it is a miracle. Like my chin is over the bar. And so I'm approximating pull-ups right there in the gym. Then the next thing is handstand push-ups. So Katie jumps on that wall. She gets 2 45-pound plates and she's doing handstand push-ups. This guy is like, Kathleen, come here. And he gets this box. It's like a wooden box, which I later learned is for burpee box jumps. He's like, I want you to lay on the box like this, take your hands. And then he puts like some mat down there and he's like, go like this. And I'm like, what's that mat for? He's like, well, it's an abdominal mat. And normally it's used for sit-ups. But in this case, in case you lose control, I don't want you to hit your head on the floor. It was a proud moment. But the point is, everything he did for me that day, handing me the first rubber band, the second rubber band, giving me the box, the ab mat to protect my head. He didn't say, Kathleen, you peed on yourself in the warm-up, you can't stay. That didn't happen. He was like the Nancy Drew or Hardy Boy of fitness. Like, what can I do to keep this geriatric member of the community engaged in this class? And I have to say, I have stuck with this for a long time. And at the end of this first year, my daughter entered me in a CrossFit competition and for my age group and for my stage, and I won 3rd place in that competition. Thank you. Because there were 3 people in my age group. So I was rocking more cellulite than everybody in that gym put together. But the point is, they did everything they needed to do to keep me in that environment. I don't feel embarrassed I still can't do a pull-up. I've been doing this for 6 years. I'm still not there, but I feel welcomed. I feel valued, and I'm getting better. So my skills, I'm getting stronger. Cardio is better. So when we think about tier 2, and in what I'd really just described to you is more tier 3, the point in a Ci3T model is to think about an additional intensity. It's not necessarily a separate place. It could be, but it doesn't have to be. So when we think about doing tier 2 in a Ci3T model, you would take all the things that you're doing right now, and we're just going to make them transparent so that every coach, so to speak, every teacher will have this like bag of rubber bands and boxes and things to keep kids engaged. So like for self-monitoring, in a tier 2 grid, you would explain what it is. And remember, a tier 2 support isn't a person. It's what the person does, because the person can do more than one thing. And I'm ideally, this is a short version of it for this presentation, but like this is going to be written so that somebody can read that and know what's going to happen. And now here's the game changer. Instead of it being teacher referral, you will not see that in here. You're actually going to use data a couple times a year, specifically 3, fall, winter, and spring, to see for whom might this be a good idea. And you decide, and you can download these from the website, but you're going to say like, all right, we want to offer this to kids that have moderate risk for externalizing, or maybe we want to also have an academic piece. We want them to have 1 or more course failures, or maybe we want to have kids below a certain grade point average. You decide, but these are like data checks, like checking to see who might need these. And then if a kid goes to get this extra support, there's 3 things that we're going to check. We're going to ask, in addition to progress monitoring for the kid, like if I'm progress monitoring to increase work completion or engagement or attendance, that's the target for the kid. But in addition to progress monitoring that, we have to know, again, what does the kid think about this before you start? Like that social validity, we need to ask the kid, because if a kid looks at that and says, dude, I would be so embarrassed to have a self-monitoring form on my desk, like I'm not going to do it, there's no point even starting it. We either need to adjust it to something that they feel comfortable with, like otherwise they're simply not going to do it. I remember like when my son was, upper elementary school, he like brought me this 1-800 number and he's like, Mom, call this number. They will send you 2 things. They will send you a cream that will attack your wrinkles from the outside. And they will send you a pill that will attack your wrinkles from the inside. And I'm like, Nathan, this is normal. Like mommies get a little older, they get a little softer, they get a little bit more wrinkly. It's all normal and it's okay. He's like, Mom, it doesn't have to be like this. My friends' moms don't look like this. And I'm like, ouch, shots fired, painful. But I never called the 1-800 number because it wasn't a goal. I've earned every one of these. And you see this? I've earned every one of those by being curious. I'm proud of those. So social validity is important because that's going to be a predictor as to whether or not they're going to do it with fidelity. So get something, and if that's not the right intervention, move on, do something that might be more private. And then once you've picked the intervention, you know how you're going to monitor the progress, then we got to think about treatment integrity, because just because you give a kid an intervention doesn't mean they're doing it. Like even a reading intervention, just because a kid is at the table doesn't mean they're participating. So we need to check that. And then we need to have a plan to review the data so that a child doesn't stay in an intervention longer than they need to be there. And you need to give it sufficient time. Like if you're trying to address a skill deficit, like a can't do problem, it's going to take time to learn it. Like you're teaching a kid mathematics or algebra, it takes time to learn it. But for every extra support in the building, all this information is right here for every single support. So it's clear what it is. There's a description, how you can get into it, how you can use data to monitor progress, how you can monitor if it's happening. And then if it's not working, then you know to conclude that one and either try a different tier 2 or a different tier 3. And when we were talking about the value of screening data, this is how you explain it to parents. That this is what I'm going to use to figure out if your child needs something different than what we're doing for everybody. So it's not a problem, it's an expectation. I remember being in a building one time in one of the districts we worked in, there were 42 schools in it. And every single school had this giant like poster from Kinko's that showed all the big pieces of their Ci3T models, including their whole list of tier 2 and tier 3. And I remember one day watching this mom, and she went up there and she was like looking across and writing things down. And of course I'm on recon, so I have to follow her into the office because I'm curious as to what she's doing. So I go in there and I watch her talk to the office person, to the principal. And she's like, I think my daughter could use this writing intervention. I think my son needs this. And the principal was so great. He's like, hey, let me walk you out. It was a new mom to the school. He said, this is how we know what's going to happen. Like we're doing all this for every kid. And then 3 times a year, we're going to check. So if it does turn out to be that, we will absolutely reach back and connect with you before we would do anything extra. And I could watch her physically look relieved. And as a mom, you heard the number of times I've moved. When schools have things set up like that, it is a relief for parents to know that somebody's checking multiple times a year. So when we think about tier 2 supports, they could be for any number of things. It could be for alcohol prevention issues. It could be for social skills. It could be, I might need to realize that some kids are going to need some additional, I might need more active supervision. If I got lots of office discipline referrals calling out of a certain place, and I might want to see like, how does this a couple kids do if they're getting more of that? I might need to think about using validated programs like Read 180 if I've got kids that are in my middle or high school that are still not reading on point. But we want equal access to these interventions. And that's why it cannot respectfully just be teacher referral or parent referral, because not everybody knows how to play the school game. And so we really need to make sure that the data sweeps are going to make sure that kids get checked multiple times a year. And some programs have no end date. Some of the high schools that we've worked with, they did these really cool mentoring programs where they looked for sophomores, juniors, and seniors. And this was literally their entry criteria. They had, in this school, it had to be 10th, 11th, and 12th. They looked for kids that had moderate to high, initially just externalizing behavior patterns. They had to have more than 2 office discipline referrals. They had to have missed more than 5 days of school in one grading period, and they had to have a grade point average below 275. So I want you to imagine the Ci3T leadership team, they're literally filtering all their data. And Becky, I know you're thinking, okay, Excel, click, turn on filters. That's exactly what they did. And it's like, show me all the kids in those grade levels, show me this grade point average. And so it's just filter, filter, filter. And that's how they knew which kids to invite to that extra support. And then they got this mentoring support through the entire year. And some kids got it all the way through graduation. And then there was another thing in this school, same school, they did this thing where in this state, this was in Tennessee, you could not get your high school diploma unless you passed this targeted algebra class. And so they had this as one of their tier 2 support, so that immediately, going back to Catherine's point in the breakout room, like these interventions have to get connected pretty quickly. So this became available for 12th graders who at any point, if their grade dropped below a 75% at any point in the semester in their management system, and they had a study hall, they got to self-select into this opportunity. And if they didn't have a study hall, they could join one. But that's where they went in and did this extra support for algebra. So lots and lots of cool ways to do this. And then the same thing is happening at tier 3. And to be clear, you don't need 900 tier 2 or tier 3 supports. You need good ones. You need ones that have enough evidence behind them to suggest that if I do this, it's going to get me the return on what I'm looking for my child. So like the functional assessment based interventions, like figuring out the target behavior, figuring out the why they're doing it, coming up with the replacement behavior, that works. There's plenty of evidence behind that. And so before I engage in something like this, like a functional assessment based intervention, like this is an example at a middle school. And this, if you look at the dates on this, was literally 4 weeks until the end of the school year. And you might think, why would you start a functional assessment based intervention at the time? This teacher was like at the end of her pregnancy and the end of her rope. She's like, I need help today. So she used her screening data. They screened a kid in, they got parent permission. These were the first 2 days of engagement. And then like, after we're done with the novelty of somebody observing us, this was this kid's level of engagement. They designed the functional assessment based intervention. They put it in place. On this day when it drops, you might guess what's happening here. It was 1 day, teacher was out and they had a substitute. So there was a breach in implementation and then it was put back in. And then the teacher's like, oh my God, you're kidding. We got to withdraw it. We got to withdraw it. Because if you don't know if it's blueberry pie or this intervention that's changing the behavior for the child. So as soon as the withdrawal, taking away the support showed that engagement dropped, then they put it back in. And this was great for this kid to learn that what you do matters, like this intervention that you were taught to do, which I believe had a self-monitoring component in it, but don't quote me on that because I haven't checked it out for a while. But if that is a tier 3 support is meaningful to you, then you might check this out. And on this page, there's everything you would need to do, videos, little info guides, all the handouts to do like that tier 3 support. And I saw a number of you had check in, check out, which is awesome. Tons of evidence to show that really works. Less effective for kids with internalizing issues as originally designed. So something to keep in mind, you want to put in the back of your mind, like, ooh, I might need to look at something else for kids with internalizing issues. But there are these validated resources that you can use. We're going to head into our last conversation right now. And here's what I'm hoping you will do is it's choice. You have choice. You can either talk in your groups about what tier 2 and tier 3s you currently have in place and whether or not you'd like to make those more transparent for your community by putting them into these intervention grids. And if you decide you want to use those grids, there's empty ones. You can go to building your Ci3T model, find this accordion that says Ci3T blueprints A through F. And here's the tier 2 and the tier 3 one. You can download those. I also want to show you if you are just like, ooh, I just like what exactly was up there a second ago. Then what you can do if you want to, if you log into Ci3T, and again, it's just ci3t.org. And if I go to this professional learning tab, and I scroll down here to those blue accordions that you saw a few minutes ago. And if you think, oh, I like that self-monitoring intervention. And then I might go right here and say, I want to find that intervention grid to see what the words were on that slide so that you could edit it rather than create it. When you download this, if you don't have 27,000 documents open on your computer, you'll be able to just find that easily. When this pops up, you will see again, this is all editable. So there's a PDF version, there's a Word document, but right here's for elementary. If you scroll down, you could, if you wanted to, just copy this or do a save as, and then edit it for a screening tool that you're using or modify it for your use. And every one of those in that tiered library. And if you want to come to my class tonight on how to write a grant, this will be the syllabus that we'll be using later. But any of these you might check out as different targeted supports. So go ahead and enjoy our last break together. And again, it's going to be taking a few minutes to go either look at your own tier 2 or tier 3, or just taking time to explore this professional learning tab. So I'll see you back in 15 minutes, and then we're going to come back and wrap up together. Go have fun. High five. 10. Be right. the intent of those grids is to make transparent for all the teachers as well as family members and administrators to say, here's the stuff that we're offering. And some of those systems that we work with that do Ci3T at the district level, they'll actually at the district say, here's our bank of tier 2 interventions that we will support as a district. And we will fund the professional learning for these. We will help you set up your data structures for these. And the expectation is that like every middle school gets these, every high school gets these, every K through 12, whatever. But they say these, and then they say you're also welcome to have others, but they have to be vetted to make sure that there's enough evidence behind them to suggest that if I do this with fidelity, it's going to work, because you can't provide professional learning on everything. And the nice part of having clarities of what's in place is that then when the screenings are done, and I loved watching this in the early days before all the technology was there, paper pencil. I watched some people literally bring in their Ci3T implementation manual. They did their screenings, which were on a computer on their server. So the way they did it is and don't die when I tell you this, people aren't doing it this way anymore, but they would go and screen their kids. And then they used to have a little folder for them. And in that folder was the printout of their kids, like for that one period that they rated, that had their number of office discipline referrals and their academic scores. And then the teachers would go hand enter that so that they had the data right there, because it was before the information systems were integrating data. But then the teachers would open up their Ci3T manuals, turn to the tier 2 pages, and then they would use those data filters, just like we talked about, to see for whom might that be a good idea. And I remember being at one time, and this teacher's like, I'm going to go ahead and call so-and-so about this person. Then they're like, does their brother need anything else? We can make that phone call together to another teacher. Because it was like everybody in the school was doing it at the same time. But the idea would be, this is a list of evidence-based practices and how to use them, like to get kids connected to that. And as Kelly was talking about, this does mean you have to provide professional learning to the adults to be able to do these well. It's so, because a lot of times I think, like as somebody else mentioned in another breakout room, a lot of this is happening very informally. So people are grabbing what they know to do, but it's not necessarily using data to determine who's going to get it. And my biggest fear is overlooking a kid who needs help. And when I think about, there's going to be 2 errors that are going to happen in screening. Sometimes you're going to over include, and some, like it's a false positive, like you say a kid has a concern and they really don't. And I think about the consequence of that means that kid gets extra help. I can live with that. What I really worry about are false negatives, like the kid that we overlook that needed some help that didn't get it. So loved your conversations and appreciate that. So as you're thinking about next steps and screening as where we are right now, you're in different stages. Some people are exploring it. Some people have committed to it and they're trying to find a way, and some people have it in place. And one thing I want to emphasize is that right now, all we've talked about today are teacher completed screeners. There are other screening tools out there. And there are screening tools that some of them are wonderful tools that also have intervention materials with them. There are also some that have teacher completed version and parent completed version and students. So you can get family perspective, kid perspective, and teacher. But remember, in a teacher completed screener, remember that teachers are already mandated reporters. If they knew something was amiss, that child was a risk to themselves, or if they were in harm's way, they would have already had to report it. But if you are doing screenings from other perspectives, like a family completed screener or a student completed screener, you need to remember that you have to review those data swiftly and you have to respond to them, because you're introducing new vulnerabilities to screen and then sit on it. It can't be, we're just getting started with screening and we don't have anything for tier 2, but next year we are so on top of this. Like it can't be that. There has to be a plan for responding to it. So we encourage you, if you'd like, to check out these on that one page that I was showing you. There's like little short videos there that you could use. There's like a 3-minute one, there's a longer one, but it just kind of goes through some tips for screening in the COVID era. One of which starts with doing exactly what you're doing. Engage in professional learning about how to use screening data, and then use multiple sources of information. And when I say that, I am not saying use multiple screening tools for the same construct. Like you need one validated screening tool. You don't need 3, but you would want to look at that with your academic data, your office discipline referrals, your attendance. So I heard somebody talk about triangulating data. That's spot on. Like you want to pull from multiple sources, but some people will say, should I use 2 different screening tools, like screen on one, and if they screen in, then screen them again? That's not the practice. The practice would be screen, use multiple sources, and then you might need to do a more detailed assessment, like the social skills rating systems, the social skills improvement system rating scale, which would go in like a deeper dive to find out where is this child's strengths, where are their acquisition deficits, which means no amount of M&Ms is going to make it happen because they haven't learned how to do it yet. And then there's also kids that have performance deficits. I don't want to, why don't you make me challenge? And that's a completely different way of managing it. So do check out some of these resources here on screening. And this is the video, and there's excerpts, like there's 3 minutes, which matches my attention span. And I think there's like a 27-minute one if people want more. And then this is a downloadable infographic if you want, like if you're currently exploring screening. And I know, again, people are in different stages, but just screen responsibly, especially when it comes into bringing outside sources of information. So all good things. So you covered a lot of ground. I might be thinking that some of you might be feeling like my bangs are blown back and I'm thinking about a career in Starbucks at this moment. So much caffeine, so much happiness in a cup. I get it. But if you're staying with your current job and continuing down this path, I'd like you to go back to any little notes or thoughts that you took for today. And I'd like us to actually take a few minutes to do some action planning. And by that, I mean, is there a nugget that you walked out with from today and that could be useful? Like, how do you feel about even just supporting the acknowledgement piece for the adults in your building? Would that feel something that could be a closeout activity for you that could help your school's procedures for reinforcing? If you are here as a teacher, is it a possibility that you can think intentionally about how you're going to do acknowledgements? If anybody had some, like one of the groups, they're like, ooh, I really like the idea of the secondary grids and the tiered intervention library idea. And so one of the things we talked about was starting with something that's already familiar to people. So there's a bunch of people who indicated they do check in, check out. So if that's already in people's repertoire, you might download that check in, check out tiered intervention grid and put that, fill it out, like take the name of it, describe what it is. And instead of it being teacher referral, how would you use the data that you currently collect as part of regular school practices to figure out for whom that might be a good idea? And then when a kid goes into that, your progress monitoring is the check-in, check-out form that they're doing. There's targets that you're set from, but what are you doing to make sure that kids really check out, like actually check in and check out with their coach? Is there a parent component to it? So you want to monitor fidelity and then ask your kids. We've got social validity forms on our website where you can actually ask the kids, what do you think of this? Is this helpful? And kids are great. Like students are amazing at telling you like how it can be better. And then you want to look to see how that's working. I also want to say, a huge benefit of taking the time to do all of this, like make transparent, what is at tier 1, what is at tier 2, then when people get called out that are specialists, like behavior specialists or school psychologists, when your supports and your expertise are requested, if you are in a system where this is all in place, it could look like this. You walk into a building, you're there to meet with a teacher about a particular child that's got some concern. You would be able to say, let's open your Ci3T manual. I'd like to see what it looks like at tier 1 for you. Can we go ahead and draw down your treatment integrity data? I'd like to see what that looks like in your classroom and as a school as a whole. And then you can say, you've mentioned that you've tried some tier 2 supports. It looks like you tried a self-monitoring intervention. So I'd love to see the data on how that went for that child. And you would be able to log into your tier 2 tracker and say, if Catherine's the teacher, she could say, actually, I've done this with Kathleen now for 6 weeks. Let me show you the data behind that. So it's not a story, it's data, and it's a graph to say how it's working. Because there's moments, it's hard, sometimes as a teacher, and I remember one time talking to somebody and they're like, none of this is working, none of it at all. I have done everything on there. I've done check-in, check-out. I have done self-monitoring. I've done social skills groups with the kids and nothing's working. And I'm like, 7. And she's like, 7. I'm like, 7. Today's the 7th day of school. And in that moment, I do know it feels like dog years when you're in a classroom with a kid that you don't quite know how to support, but we have to give things time to work. So if you had access to the data of what's happening at tier 1, what's happening at tier 2, happening at tier 3, think about how great your job would be as like behavior specialist, because you could walk in and have this really accurate history of not just that year, but past years. Some of the districts that we're supporting, like right now in Kansas, like I love the fact they're entering in their 9th year of screening. Think about what that means. Kids that started the year in kindergarten when screening first started to happen, those kids are in 8th grade right now. They can pull up that child's history. What a gift that is. So I'm going to invite you to dedicate some time for your own planning, your own learning. I'm not here to try to convince you to do this. I am trying to convince you to take time to see what you're already doing that's in this, explore the possibility of what could be some benefits from that, and really with an eye towards screening. You do want to learn more about how to build Ci3T models, like to integrate and emphasize. It's not scrapping what you've done, it's organizing what you've done with PBIS at the core. There's a little iBook that could guide you through this process. Some people here, like Tina Lawson, like she's come to our Ci3T Train the Trainer event. That might be a good thing for you. We've got really, oh, I'm so happy to hear that you're excited about the self-monitoring piece. And on our website, there's a tab called Ci3T in Action, and there's a block from middle school and high school implementers. Go check them out. We haven't updated them for a while, so they're a few years old, but go check them out. And I love the stories of some of these guys that have just done incredible jobs implementing it. You yourself may not be a district administrator, but if you want information to share back with people about what this could potentially look like, in that iBook I was just showing you, if you see that icon that looks like a little pillared building, every time you see that, that's information that's designed for an administrator. And if you click on those links, it just takes you to the stuff that's on the Ci3T tab. So you could just download it and share those things if you'd like. And I want to emphasize is that there's no silver bullet that's going to take care of everything in the first year. So when we think about this implementation journey, it's generally a year to build that, going through that whole process. And then you go through implementation, and it's usually 2 to 3 years of high fidelity implementation when you start seeing that change for students. And this graphic is intended to illustrate for you that it's still a learning journey. So even when you are, as you're progressing through that training series, you don't sit and do nothing. You are continuing to learn and continuing to access additional information. Oftentimes we will have people that while they're building, they do these activities while they wait, is what they call it. So that those low intensity strategies that we were talking about today, like how to do behavior specific praise, like the hows and whys of behavior, or building in instructional choices, those are very philosophically consistent with a Ci3T model, right? It's positive, it's productive, it's skill building. You want to be very careful while you are building not to bring something in as a Band-Aid. Like you wouldn't want to bring in a public, like a public shaming system where you publicly acknowledge every time a child makes a mistake. That's going to be counterproductive to what you're trying to accomplish in creating positive, productive learning environments. But just know that you're going to have ongoing professional learning throughout your implementation journey. And when we think about that implementation process, that's another thing that I wanted to say is that on the website, if you wanted to, like when you eventually get to that implementation stage, there's guidance for you about how to move through those years. And in each of these accordions, we typically recommend that Ci3T leadership teams, like in a middle school, in a high school, in an elementary school, that they come together as a team monthly for monthly meetings, and they partner together to have continued professional learning around how to use their data to shape practices at their school. So like here's session 1 that you might do as you get started. You could, if you'd like, just download these presentations and pacing sheets and timing. And just to let you know, I know sometimes people think, oh my gosh, I wouldn't even know what to do if I open that slide deck. Let me show you this, this possibility for you. So that document I just downloaded, I'm going to bring over here for you.
Do you want to share screen quick?
Oh, sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
No, I'm so grateful to you for saying that. See, we've already got a comfortable learning environment together. Good. I'm doing a terrible job of making this transparent for you. So this is an example of this pacing sheet, and I apologize that the screen sharing dropped. Do you see this, colorful graphic right now? Okay, great. So I clicked here for this template agenda. When I pulled it up, it's this, and this would be the guide. So let's say 2 of you are going to work with the high school, and let's say your training was going to start at maybe 8 in the morning instead of this time. You can go ahead and say, I'm going to start my training at 9 o'clock in the morning. When I change this to 9, everything auto adjusts for you. And so this is going to help you to pace out how to go through that 2-hour session, and then there's a 3-hour version if you'd prefer to do that. So I just want you to know all these resources are here, and somebody had just private messaged me to put that in the chat, and I'm happy to do that. So I just want you to know it's more than just building. It's having a long-term plan to support implementation. And again, everything's free access. And in a day and age when everybody's financially strapped for multiple reasons, just know that those resources are there and you're welcome to use any of those things. We also have, if you're interested, little templates to like help you organize your assessment schedules. So you know what data are going to be available to you on what schedule. And like anything, if it's very important at the beginning of every year to calendar out those times. And you can think about the Ci3T leadership team as being distinct from your building leadership team, like because your building leadership team is managing a lot of the logistics. Your Ci3T leadership team is kind of like the intellectual lead. So it's thinking about the academics, the behavior, and the social emotional well-being. You still need all your other committees to get the happenings of the school day done, but we want to make sure that there's representation from those other committees on your team. And then the last thing I wanted to share with you, if any of this feels appealing to you, you can go to this tab on the professional learning tab.
Kathleen,
Yes.
so sorry to interrupt you. Could you share your screen again? I'm not sure if it's on someone else's end, just to be sure. Just to be sure.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry it's not popping up.
I got a request, so just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
No, that's great. Okay. Can you see this now? Is that better? Okay, great. So if you, and I'm going to share one more thing. Tell me if you can see this now. It's that same colorful graphic we were just looking at. Better? Okay. I'm sorry. I'm not sure what happened there. So if you click on this professional learning tab and you scroll down here, if you would like we had one last night from 5 to 7 p.m. and we had about 70 people come last night, and they're all in different stages. Some are building, some are implementing. But this is, again, just a free access support. Like last night's session was on how do we set up for success for the school year. You sign up, you could come as a team, you could come alone, you could come as individuals. But I want you to know it is a journey just to pull together all the great happenings in your school, make transparent what's there, and then have a plan to get that moving forward. And we've had the honor now through the year. We've actually been able to hire some people that are on our Ci3T research team that are now retired from being previous leaders in Ci3T schools and districts. And it has been such a joy. And they are very, very helpful in terms of one of them was just talking last night about their expectation is in their building. Every adult, it has the expectation that they carry a template with them, like they're an iPad or a computer. That's just the expectation in that school, because everything that they need for negotiating the school day in tier 2 and tier 3 is in their implementation manual. And so they have it. Her rule is that it had to have it on their person, whether hard copy or electronically, but they wanted a parent approach to say, what does my kid need? They wanted them to have the access to say, here's what it looked like last time. Here's the supports that are available. So just really creative ways about moving that forward. The other thing I mentioned at the very beginning of this training is that this is just one website, and I've connected you a lot of resources on there, but it's not the only one. The other the website I'm really strongly encouraging you to check out if you haven't so far is PBIS.org. And there are a number of practice briefs and informational guides that you can look at specifically related to PBIS, but I'm more specifically right now about the idea of systematic screening. One thing that we get a lot of questions on right now is how do I communicate with my community about systematic screening? And some of the breakout rooms had great conversations about sharing information. And Becky was sharing about how some of the districts that she works with, there's a letter that goes home at the beginning of the year. And we talked also about making sure that when kids enroll during the year, that there's something that goes home that says, in our district, we screen for hearing, vision, reading. We look for, emotional well-being, how your kid's doing. In the state of Tennessee, they screen for body mass index because obesity is a key problem in that state. So I just want you to be aware that there are multiple resources. And I hope that today, that overall big picture, this is the takeaway, is that I'm hopeful that as you had the chance to come and listen and learn and be engaged, and thank you so much for persisting, even in the storm that you are all facing today. I hope that today you thought about the great things that you're already doing in your LEAs, in your schools, in your districts, in your states. And there's so much to celebrate. And if it is useful to you, you might think about putting this all together in a Ci3T structure so that there's one integrated team for meeting kids' academic, behavior, and social emotional well-being in that one integrated tiered system. We want to also make sure that it's clear that conversation we had today, that when we put everything together at tier 1, we're going to focus that in an integrated way. And before we immediately jump to tier 2 and tier 3 supports for kids, we want to think about also empowering our educators to make sure that they feel comfortable. And now I'm no longer sharing my screen, that they feel comfortable with those low intensity supports. And that's stuff you could start on next week if you wanted to, because those are going to connect to any system. So in that suite, the intent would be to organize all the great things that you have going on and think about how to empower your educators. The final thing I wanted to say is we've got gobs and gobs of data to show that over time, when implemented with fidelity, risk goes down in these buildings, right? So behavior screenings show that the percentage of kids in the green bars gets bigger. And we have lots and lots of studies to show that those fall scores predict how kids do. So behavior is improving, which would suggest academics and other things are improving as well. The last bit of good news is that we've now also done some studies at elementary, middle, and high school about how teachers fare in Ci3T systems. And we only have one of each of these studies for each grade level, but I want you to know, here's what we've learned so far, is that after 2 years of implementation, when they get to about 75% implementation as the fidelity marker, we have found that teachers have lower burnout rates than the national average, and that they have a higher sense of self-efficacy in some, not all, but in some domains as a teacher. So at this point, I just want to thank you for the work that you're doing. I hope this system will bring some consideration for efficiencies, and I hope it will do it in a way that is healthy for not just the students, but also the adults, such as yourself. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. And thanks to Jennifer and Erica and others who invited me here. It was a real gift. And Catherine and Tina, always good to see you guys again, and Becky. So Donna, thank you so much. Enjoy the day. And I'm going to ask that you guys stop recording, and then I'm going to put my cell phone